Very good. So what is happening? We don't get the same amount of people in this room. Well, that's a challenge for you, not for us, because we expect then much more interaction with maybe not each of you, but certainly from the room. Well, we are here with a very nice panel, and we are also experience a new way of moderating a session. So.
Then we can go, guys.
You don't have the macro? Maybe you can use that one. Please take. Voilà. So, welcome to the session on smart electric mobility. You are here with us for almost an hour or so. So, not a very long session, but a very dense one. I will not take too much time because at the end of the day you are not so much interested about what we think, but certainly interacting much more with the panelists that we have here. I just want to highlight in a very few words the relevance of this session, as we have established long-term emission strategy, and of course we want to make use of electromobility to help us towards achieving that vision. There are a number of uncertainties, but less and less. But certainly we need to deal with some of the obstacles. I'll just finish by saying that we will have with here Lauriane Grit from FIA. So while we will discuss about the enablers, the challenges, we will certainly always look at her to look at the user, the end user. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that it works. Tag?
Thanks. And I think, as you're saying, I think it's an important point that here we're co-moderating. It's going to be something that we're going to see more of in the future. And I think, we should recall slightly the fifth dimension of the Energy Union was energy research, innovation, and competitiveness. And also trying to, as the phrase was at the time, but still is, break down the silos between the different parts. I think you see that again in the political declarations of the political guidelines of the new president-elect. And in that sense, I just wanted to make some comments about why this is so important to DG Ener, that we don't this link between sectors. I think it's important that we see the link between energy systems as well as transport systems, and that we see ourselves, whether it's in a car or stationary, that the battery that's important is that we're able to talk to the energy system and engage with the energy system in a way that works for the consumer, but also for the energy system. It helps to deliver the energy transition. And I think this research initiative, research and innovation, is key to that, because this is what the information of what we learn from this whole procedure is what will guide the policies of the future. This is what will guide how and the tools that we use, for whether that's regulatory or otherwise, to deliver the vehicle to grid, the grid to vehicle connections that we need for the future. And we can leave a whole series of issues here to one side about whether that car is the property of the company, the manufacturer, the information, these things. We still always need to go back to the issue that it has to communicate between the transport system and the energy system if we're to get the synergies that we want. I think we can only do that with effective research and innovation. That's why we're so interested in what is being done in this, and I so much look forward to the information that you can tell us today and also in the future.
So we will not take too much time now, go immediately to the question, but I just want to add one thing. You see two DGs on the podium, but we are not only the two of us. So first, to say a big thank you to the colleagues from DG Research, who have been helping a lot to prepare the session, but also to say that we will conclude the session with Clara de la Torres, who is coming from DG Climate, has a strong knowledge about research activity. So also through the cluster itself, where we are dealing with electric mobility, we were trying to let emerge a common agenda. You can go for the question.
Inviting our guests to speak.
So we have Stefan Neugebauer, who wear very different hats. actually has been very much involved with EGVIA, but is also working for the BMW group, and actually has a strong place also in AirTrack. So, you can go ahead with the questions.
Yeah, I think we've got one big important question here is, what challenges have you faced both as a group and as an individual, as representative of an individual company, in introducing new electric vehicles onto the market, and both in that way, how have you overcome them, and what messages do you have how these can be overcome for other companies, for the sector as a whole?
So first of all, I think Europe was and is very successful in the development of electromobility. We have a lot of products available in different segments of vehicles. And when you look at the announcement last week at the motor show in Frankfurt, you can see that all the different OEMs, they really announced that they have or they will have a huge amount of electrified vehicles. This means battery electric vehicles or plug-in hybrid vehicles actually in the market or in the upcoming years. And this was a huge challenge for the whole sector because this has to be developed. So this was successful, and this was also successful based on the public funding from the European Commission, like Green Vehicle, from the national member states. This is a success story. But is it also a success story at the market? No, not at the moment. And there are reasons for this, because the products today, they are not facing with the needs of the users totally, in terms of costs, in terms of range, in terms of charging infrastructure. So there's only one possibility to do the next step, and the next step has to create the success at the market. The next step is to improve the vehicle itself, costs, range, weight, whatever, and to create the infrastructure. Because when we are talking about electrified mobility, we need the new infrastructure for charging. So this has to be done, and therefore we need an ambitious program for the research, because research has to deliver these technologies and concepts for the infrastructure and to build this infrastructure. And it's not so easy to create this infrastructure because we are also talking about urban areas, how to create it, not only high power charging, also low power charging in urban areas. So you can see we need the users, we need the energy sector, we need the cities, we need a lot of new stakeholders. And this is the challenge, and therefore we try to bring in our discussion, in our partnership, new actors which can deliver these stakeholder point of view.
I want to pick up on 2 points you said there, if that's okay. I'd be very interested in your points on one, on urban planning, as you said, in cities, and also on how we introduce and bring in new players and new stakeholders into this research and innovation framework. What advice would you have to us to how to have that happen?
I have a clear advice, very clear advice. Continue with the partnership, because we have a very well-functioning partnership. I'm here also as the chairman of the Green Vehicle Initiative. But to be honest, the Green Vehicle Initiative actually was and is more or less focused on the vehicle itself. For the next step, we need the system approach. We need the system approach with the energy, with the infrastructure, with opportunities of digitalization, with new services, with shared mobility, and all these new system approach opportunities. So we need to bring together these new partners, and therefore we have to do the next step in this partnership, from the vehicle, more or less vehicle focus to the system focus. And therefore, we started, and you know this, we started a discussion with several partners, with several European technology platforms, with key associations, what should be done in the next framework program in Horizon Europe. And we are in a good way to bring this together. And this is one benefit, one clear benefit of European funding, to bring together the needed different sectors. It's not only to bring together universities, research institutes, suppliers, OEMs. This was the traditional way. This was needed. But now we have to bring together new sectors, and the public funding, and to have a clear partnership to develop common roadmaps, to discuss and exchange the point of views, then to make a clear plan and to prepare together the calls in a flexible way with low administration and with a discussion with key players for the infrastructure side, with the cities, with national member states. This is how we should continue.
I want to actually build on what you have said, but ask a question to Julien Martin, who is working in EDF with quite a strong experience on e-mobility. So Stefan just said that we need to go a bit outside the usual bubble, and of course I would say that the grids are taking a strong role, but who is at the core? Because I would imagine that from the energy sector, well, you would look at e-mobility from how you would manage a grid, then how you would work as making use of, let's say, the energy supply there. So what are the challenges and how do you see your cooperation with the gentleman working on automotive sector in the automotive sector?
I'll try to answer to that, but just before I would like to insist on the fact that we need to work together. We actually work more and more closely with the automobile industry. I'm representing EDF, which is utilities. My presence here is not obvious, and for the first time I was invited to a similar conference a few months ago, and I'm very pleased to participate to the debate, because obviously we need to develop a view on this. And there is this issue regarding the interaction between the vehicles and the grid, which is an issue. It's also a new electric used, so we need also to promote this new electric consumption in the system, and to make it acceptable in the end for the consumers. Regarding the grid integration, I would be very reassuring, because there's not really an issue today. You have to differentiate two concerns. One is about energy. Do we have enough green, low carbon electron to fit in the cars? This is actually the case, because I mean, even if you project the uptake of the EV vehicles in a decade, where we expect millions of vehicles annually to be sold, it would only represent at European level maybe 50, 60 terawatt hours in the system. That's a very small amount of energy if you compare this to the total electricity that you consume across Europe. It's 2,000 or 3,000 terawatt hours. So the uptake of EV will increase the demand, but in the same time you will make a lot of effort of energy efficiency in other sectors, and you will develop also a lot and much more renewables in the energy in the system. So the purpose is not really, is there a job that we can feed this additional energy use with green energy? That would be the case. Don't be afraid. The question is, what's happened if all these vehicles charge at the same time as the grid? Because that will increase the peak of demand in the grid, and that can lead to significant amount of investment for the grid operators to reinforce the network, and for the power system company that will need to provide additional power in the system to meet this demand. So this can be a concern in coming years. So we need to tackle this, and that's where smart electricity mobility comes. We actually have some technology already available that can be very easy to implement, that enable to manage these issues and even to make the electric cars an opportunity for the power system. So it's not a treat. It's perfectly manageable, and if we do it correctly, it's need a little bit innovation today, but it can come quite easily in the coming years. That will even be an opportunity for the system. That's why EDF is involved in the sectors right now. We are deploying and operating charging infrastructures for decades with a subsidiary that's called Easivia, and now would like also to continue this development, but also to promote smart charging at a much more level than today. So we had invested in a couple of startups that are developing, innovating the technology in this, and this is actually enabling technology is on the table. We just need to scale up the development of this technology and to make it really efficient. And it can provide clear benefits for the final users, for the power system, for the automobile industry, for society at large.
Julien, just a quick follow-up question, and then we move to Lauriane. I just wanted to, so you say we need to go, to another level.
Yep.
What does it take to go to another level?
There is actually some pilot series that have been developed in Denmark, in the Great Britain also. Great Britain is a great territory that supports smart charging systems. And they provide some favorable framework from a regulatory point of view. But to scale this up, we'll need to clarify some issue regarding standardization about the communication protocol. That's on progress with the standard ISO 15118. We need also to clarify standards regarding to data access. This is a pretty controversial issue with the car manufacturers, but we need to get some data from the vehicles to make those services available for the consumers. And we also need some improvement in the market design to make the energy markets able to reveal fully the fair value of the services in the end to the consumers. So there is some challenge to make, but if we do it, this is a win-win situation for the consumers, for the industry, both the power system and the automobile in the end.
I'm a moderator here today, so I'm not going to bore you with talking about electricity market design. But if there's anybody in the audience who wants to, I'd be very happy to listen to them. I think there's two issues there, and I want to move between them here. Maybe as we move from this very technical point of how the electricity market design works, and I think we will come back to this issue of interoperability, data, services, who does what, inevitably. But I think there's somehow a more fundamental issue I'd like to put to Lauriane. We see very ambitious plans in member states member states you know very well, member states I know very well, to basically phase out this, to move to completely electric vehicles. What I want to know is, are we on track to overcome users' reluctances to switch to electromobility? And I think Stefan mentioned some of the issues already.
He did indeed. I mean, thank you very much for inviting us. We represent the automobile clubs in Europe and a bit beyond, so it's 36 million users, and we're quite involved in the debate, although we don't push for a specific technology, so we're happy to accompany a change towards more electrification, but we're also looking at other motorization. Now, the first point I would like to make, which is probably not very research linked, is that people seem tired of being told what's the right direction. And that's a bit that. I mean, there's a bit of an issue that we're pushing very hard on the one hand, and on the other hand, there are specific issues happening, specific reasons why consumers are not buying in. You mentioned some of them. So for us, the research and innovation should really look in assessing the impact of the various motorization and optimize the use of various motorization, so the best vehicle for my needs in a given time. That being said, there is... Ooh, sorry, yeah. I think it's my hair or something. I'll try to move less. Let's see how that... That being said, there is still scope, indeed, especially in cities, for having more electrification. And for smaller vehicles, I mean, we're quite involved in some projects at the moment, like Elviten, which are looking into deploying this type of mobility in the cities. And we're quite confident that this has a role to play. The research should really look into assessing and improving the consumer's acceptance. And looking at the barriers, I will dig a bit more into it. I have 3 ones mainly. First one is the charging infrastructure, as you mentioned. Second one is vehicle performance, and the third one is actually performance data and data access as well. So one of the main barriers is, the cost, first and foremost, the range anxiety. So depending on the weather conditions, depending on the number of things, you might or might not be able to reach your destination. So there we could kind of usefully work on usage patterns, so kind of reflect what are the type of use for which the electric vehicle is really, really appropriate. Also look into the development in cities. I mean, if electromobility is best placed in cities, I think that's also where we have the most issues in finding the right spots to charge cities in a big building rather than in individual homes, which is a bit easier. Get the right information to users and improve also the satisfaction they have while using the actual charging location, and look into the cost of charging. I mean, we had an interesting discussion today with my member from Denmark, and he was explaining that you have quite a number of vehicles in Denmark which are electric. You have 2 electricity providers, and if you're actually subscribed to one of them, you can charge at a given price. If you go to the next one, you have to pay 3 times the same price for the electricity. So when you have not a lot of charging station available, it is an issue for people, and then it's true, it ties you to one specific supplier. On the vehicle performance, very briefly, really understand the real range and the in-use cost. That's something that we need to look into. And finally, as well, on the environmental performance altogether, I mean, I know it's quite difficult to do, but we're looking more and more in the life cycle analysis to look from the beginning till the end of a vehicle. True, electric vehicle perform very well on a tailpipe basis. There are 0 emissions, as you call them. A bit more if you count how electricity is generated into account. But let's look into, the broader life cycle, and that's why we've developed together with the NCAP, the Green NCAP program, which really looks into the performance of vehicles. Spoiler, I mean, to date, the electric vehicle score 5 stars, the diesel and petrol up to 4 stars, but we're really looking into assessing also well-to-wheel as well. And finally, indeed, the business models to access to data. We have quite a lot of work on this. People are quite wary of sharing their location and data that is personal because it's linked to them, and that's something that we'll need to solve in order to have the best monitoring of systems.
Can I go back to you, Lauriane? Because indeed you have, and it's quite normal, you look at the end user, so it's the moment where the vehicle are available, and under what condition they are available, the cost, and how do I enjoy mobility? Is it in the same way as we used to have it today? But I want to focus a little bit more on the research and innovation agenda, because here we are trying to look at, common avenues and how we could make use of a common agenda also in how the partnership could deliver. So if you had heard the gentleman just before you, what would be your advice?
My advice, indeed, I mean, we need to work across boundaries. We need to take, I mean, you were saying we move from the vehicle to the system, and in that sense, yes, but the system should include the users, and that's the part that is a lot of unknown, because it might also be quite different depending on the different member states, depending on the experience you have. So we could look at the early movers, we could look at what's happening in Norway, for example, even if they're not EU, and try to build in kind of real access to people to this technology. I mean, maybe one of the answers is as well, because the cost is an issue. When you look into shared models and things like this, then you do actually implement more experience with the technology that will make maybe the uptake easier. And especially if the first investment and potentially the cost of reselling it onwards is not on you, but on an operator, I think the calculation then is quite different. So really looking into these avenues and to trying to build in the user's feedback. And of course, making sure that ultimately the performance of the vehicle is what we say it is, not come back in 10 years and say, well, actually, it wasn't that good.
Shall we try to see whether we have, we were supposed to have a member states perspective, and unfortunately the colleague from the Netherlands could not join us, and we were told just short notice. So what I wanted to check is whether we have a public authority in the room, either member states or local authority.
Public authority who's willing to talk.
Who is ready to talk? Is there anyone who want to engage into this discussion and see what is your perspective? Yes, please, from Transport for London. I recognize the gentleman who intervened in the previous session.
Hi, David Talbot from Transport for London. Yeah, pretty much everything that's been discussed by the panel is the sort of things we're thinking about. Somebody mentioned vehicle to grid and smart charging, a win-win situation. Yes, it is if it works for the particular user. Trouble is, the models at the moment of doing that rely on the person having a regular spot to park their car. Look in London, maybe 30% of people have a garage or driveway. Look across the rest of Europe, not many places does it get above 50 or 60% of cars that actually have a garage or driveway to park in.
It's still important. Go ahead.
Yeah. So our big concern here is that we don't create social division by doing this. You know, the haves and have-nots. The haves who've got a driveway, in effect, can fuel their vehicle for free. The people who then have to rely on the public charge point, they're paying through the nose. We're already seeing some of the fuel companies in the UK pricing their electric vehicle charging to make it cost the same as driving your diesel or petrol vehicle. So the social fairness aspect of this is one of our major concerns. Yeah, electricity generation, it will probably increase Transport for London's electricity consumption by 7 or 8-fold, and we're already one of the biggest electricity consumers in the country. That would be if we electrified everything on the roads of London. But even talking about just the cars, you're talking maybe 3 or 4 terawatt hours a year. Distributing that through London's power grid of a fast-growing city with electricity infrastructure that's been developed over the last century or so and is already struggling to cope with the demands of a modern, expanding 21st century city is not an insignificant challenge, shall we say.
So can I ask the panel maybe to react? And I think we discuss a bit technical issues, but maybe also how the product at the end of the day would be available to as many as possible.
Obviously, you have different business cases. And if we looked at vehicle-to-grid services, it obviously makes sense when you have a dedicated spot, and it's not the case for every car users. I'm perfectly conscious of that, but still, there is some part of the segment that can be addressed quite easily. That are fleets vehicles, including in the per-urban area where the vehicles are parked during the night, for example, and you could. At peak hours, for instance, provide some services which very high added values in the system, but you won't make all the vehicles in Europe providing vehicle-to-grid services. But even if it's a small part of it, let's say 10% of it, that's very huge. It's a huge mountain for the poor system. So my purpose is not that vehicle-to-grid will be generalized in the end, but you can provide some very limited smart charging services with very much simple solution, not necessarily with vehicle to grid, and you can on small part of the fleets try to develop vehicle to grid services, and even if it's small part of the system, it's still a big part for the port system. You mentioned that the grid in London is pretty old, and that might be a high challenge. I don't know the issue, but it's actually made much more sense in this case to look at smart charging. This is basically the aim of smart charging. It's to make the most value from existing infrastructure without reinforcing them. Because obviously, if you concentrate the charging in the same time, you'll have to reinforce the grid. Quite easy. Even in France, we have quite a robust network, I would say, in comparison to other systems. In the end, if we don't make it smart, that would raise an issues. So, but if you consider the London grid, and if you said that it's pretty old and already congestion, it makes sense to start now there.
I think you touched really the critical point. We all would like to have electric vehicles, especially in urban areas. But to be absolutely clear, nobody and no one of you will buy a battery electric vehicle if you do not have the opportunity to charge it overnight where the car is parked or by the day when you are at work. So what we need is the charging infrastructure. There is absolutely no doubt about this. And you will need it also in London. Yes, maybe the system is old. Yes, maybe it costs a lot of money. But sorry, we always say automotive industry has to change. Yes. We always say society has to change. Yes, that's true. And that's also true for the cities, and it's also true for London. So we have to do this together. Second point. Battery electric vehicles are one part of the solution. But we all know that they will not be the solution for all mobility needs. And therefore, we also need additional solutions for the vehicle, like the plug-in hybrids. And plug-in hybrids of the future, they will be drive very, very often in electric mode because they will have a longer and bigger range than today. But they have also the combustion engine for the long distance. And here we need renewable fuels because it's not an opportunity to burn fossil fuels in the long future. So it's absolutely clear that we need renewable electrified fuels. It's also a type of electrification. And this is something we want to develop in the next partnership and to give a specific focus on alternative fuels for these use cases. And then we need, of course, new mobility solutions for logistics, for shared mobility, for intermodality. And here we are coming more and more to the area of the digitalization. And here for me the interesting discussion will be what will be covered by a partnership like Towards Zero for decarbonization, and what will be covered by partnership, European partnership on digitalization, because there's an overlap. And here we have to discuss and to develop a clear picture who is responsible for what. Because for future research, we want to talk about not only about challenges, but also about responsibilities.
Maybe we can ask the floor to participate more. It's very useful. First, open, is there anybody volunteering? Yes. The lady there and the lady there. That's welcome that it's...
I just have a very short question. Since you said that infrastructure and the vehicles need to work closely more together, then will we see more interaction between the B4E calls and the e-mobility cause, for example, because I've been studying the current work program and I found that parking and smart parking hasn't been really the focus so far of these two areas, or they were sub-addressed as a use case. But if we are supposed to use current infrastructure more and make these buildings smart so that they can deliver more energy, for example, for e-cars, that would make sense, right, to have a bridge there. And for fuels the same way, especially biofuels, to have linkages between the different programs then.
You started and I compliment.
Okay. So, of course, when we are talking about decarbonization, it's a system approach. We talked a lot about the vehicle and the powertrain, that's fair, but we need these new services. We need these new services, and we need a better traffic condition. This means the coordination between all these different modes and between the different users in the traffic system. And I'm absolutely convinced that with a new research program, this will be covered. I'm absolutely convinced, but it's up to the Commission at the end to support this.
I think in general we have indeed a bit underestimated, let's say, the value of working on parking. And we can take this example from this topic from very different angles. So on the one hand is how you use the charging point. On the other hand, we see trends with a lot of cities trying to create, big areas at the ring fence of the city, promote, I don't know, solution with tram, with buses, and so on and so forth, but not having necessarily included how they could make use of these parking facilities to actually enable a smoother implementation of e-mobility services. So whether or not this is a research and innovation topic, or whether actually this is much more linked to how the deployment of certain solution, today's solution, can be helpful for tomorrow mobility, that I think I would tend to privilege the latter. I would try to push, and we are actually working much more with cities and within this concept of sustainable urban mobility plans to include, or to think about this kind of reflection into how they actually organize the mobility solution over a certain period of time. But maybe we can go back a little bit to this research and innovation agenda and trying to look at besides that topic, what should emerge from the partnership?
I want to make one point related to that, and I'm not going to say that we've succeeded all the time. One of the things that we've tried to do in the last few years in DG Energy is to create a stronger link between the research and innovation side of what we do and some of the more regulatory work that we do in terms of looking at, I'm going to say now, market design and what we've and how we should set up electricity markets and how network operators can work. Now that's a piece of work that's ongoing.
Yeah, sure.
Hopefully you will see some of this results come out in some of the implementing legislation that comes from the clean energy package. But this is not something that's going to be over whenever we come out with one piece of implementing legislation. It's something we need to do more often. I think that point is very well taken. But I think then that's where you go back to it again. There was another question as well.
Yes, hello, I'm working for a Dutch Knowledge Institute on Smart Charging, ELAT.nl, and I've been listening to you talking about replacing the current fossil fuel cars by electric cars, but I was wondering if you've got any ideas on how the shared car concept will influence the whole mobility subject. Because if, of course, not all the fossil fuel cars are replaced by electric car one-on-one, but we start sharing cars and we start placing them all in charging areas instead of dedicated charging spots. I personally think that's worth investigating, but I'm still trying to find a way to put my finger on how this will evolve. And I was wondering if you have any ideas on that.
That's a bit what I tried to touch upon when I said, okay, one of the main things that consumers are worried about is the cost. If you don't have the first buying cost and you just kind of buy some kind of subscription, that's going to take a lot of the uncertainty as well. One of the key issues in Norway, for example, is the resale value, because you don't know how long the battery is going to last. So that's also something that's taken away if you have more shared cars, let's say. So indeed, it can help. At the moment, I mean, the shared cars are not necessarily replacing all cars in a household. Sometimes it's replacing one of the two. Sometimes as well, it's demand that's created on top. Like someone who actually did not use a car will use one because it's available for the little limited time it's needed. So I think it can really offset a lot of the cost. And as you say, the charging, if it's well thought within the business case, it could be quite interesting for users to have the first experience with the technology, and then also, especially in cities, get more and more people to use these cars. Then you really need to look into what it replaces. I think that's where research comes in. I mean, it's electric scooters, but I've recently seen something on the electric scooters in Brussels that they're actually mostly replacing people walking or taking public transport. Whether or not this is the direction we want to take, it's worth looking into what it means for consumers and what it will replace. Sorry.
Agree. You had a gentleman over there.
So my name is Idan Mahmut. I'm a professor at the university in Constanța, Romania. And I would like to put a little bit of perspective on the other side of Europe for this electric mobility. So my question is particularly to Mr. Neugebauer, because the old, let's say, era of mobility was based on some specific centralized type of value chains, manufacturing in different factories, and then distribution of cars and so on. Do you think that e-mobility will bring towards a decentralized loops of manufacturing, integrating locally different value chains, and in this respect, not only to have, let's say, the assemblage of different cars, but also to have the integration of different other elements in several geographies and localized ecosystems?
Okay. I'm not sure that I got the question quite well, but let me give you a first answer. The automotive industry is a total global industry today, totally global. And the components are produced all over the world and all over Europe. And then you bring them together in a factory and make the assembly. This will be stable, I think, because if you replace the combustion engine by an electric engine, you have all the same parts with the heating, with the body, and so on and so on. So there is no fundamental change in the way how you create your components and how you bring them together, how you make the vehicle and how you distribute it. Was this your question?
Yes, this was, but also let us introduce in this equation also the criticality of different materials. Because in that way we are changing a little bit this way of thinking. So considering this way of, let's say, considering these value chains, we have to have the same old model where there are different spots with some piles with different materials, and then those materials are brought into these mainstreams. But this is generating also a problem of, let's call it, risks for European countries. Most of these critical materials are outside of Europe. Some of them are localized in different other spots in Europe. So in this way, do you think that this could also change a little bit of this game?
So first of all, this old model is a very successful model. And we are living quite well in Europe from this so-called old model. The second thing is that I think you have in mind the batteries. Yes, it's an issue, and we need materials also from all over the world, and this is something more related to other panels, not to the research community at all.
I have still a gentleman in the back.
Yeah, I would like to thank Claire also for mentioning this issue of deployment. And we notice, and Ivo Cray from Polis, we notice that there is a lot of budget and activity on deployment that is very close to the RNI agenda in Interreg, in CEF. I was wondering if there are any views on the perspective of that element for the next funding framework and also for the activities under Horizon Europe. I mean, there's really a lot of very fundamental, maybe too fundamental innovation happening in programs away from the Horizon 2020 agenda, which is not captured at the moment. In this community. So I was wondering if there are any views on that and on how to improve the streamlining between all these elements.
We'll ask to the panelists to start with, so that I don't give the wholly truth. But actually, I wanted also to build on what Ivo has been saying. We had the first discussion on connected and automated mobility a few minutes ago, and we discussed about the life cycle and how do we get to certain stability while still injecting innovation into the mobility system. So, yeah.
I can try to give a first answer. So, Ivo, the question is, which instrument is the right one for which activity? That's the background. And here with our partners, we discussed and we see at least three different levels of action. The first level is the fundamental research, where you develop specific components or softwares or whatever. The second level is you need to take these new innovative component and to integrate it into a vehicle or a system or whatever and test it and validate this. This is the second level. This is the level for the pre-competitive research collaboration we are now active. And the third level is then to make a dissemination, to make an industrialization, a rollout, a standardization, to create the needed physical and digital infrastructure. And I think what you mentioned with the instrument, like the structural funds and so on, they are more or less related to the third level, to the deployment activity and infrastructure activity.
But I think we can also look at the topic in terms of the lifetime for getting vehicle being used by the drivers. And so I think we have in front of us, a big bang, and we need to come with, equipping also the infrastructure to answer those needs. And we are discussing that heavily with the different DGs involved, or having budget available to help accelerating the pace. On the other hand, and I come back to Transport for London, we probably do not have a single charging point for a single vehicle. So and maybe I can get back to the panel, while we are thinking about the next generation of infrastructure, is it only about, increasing the connectivity between the vehicle, or is it something else? And so while we are moving to give some stability in terms of we want to see more zero-emission vehicle on the road, we need to come with certain answer so that we address the anxiety from the consumer. Besides the cost, besides the affordability, how do we prepare for the next decade, which hopefully does not look only as it is today, otherwise we would not have innovated enough. So
maybe I can start. I totally agree that the availability of charging infrastructure is actually the real obstacle from my views. There is cost issues, but if you look at the new generation of cars that will be available in the market next year. Let's get very close with the aids that the states can offer to electromobility. It's getting very close to thermal vehicles. And regarding the range anxiety, there is also some increase in the battery autonomy. So I think in the long term, the real issues is about charging infrastructure. It's a big one, especially if you consider some specific situation like London. There is some solution, I think, that can be pragmatically studied. Notably, the demand-driven infrastructure. I think it's really good options when you are in very dense area where there isn't a lot of parking spots, where people don't have individual parking in their apartment at home. That's what the Nordics have experimented. The Netherlands also did in Amsterdam, with pretty great feedback from these. That's just a way to ensure that the infrastructure is developed where it's needed. I mean, where the car users will use it. So that's good for the consumers. That's good for the local authorities that spend money where it's really deserved. And so I guess in the end, it's good for electromobility. When we are talking about charging infrastructures, we often are talking about how many charging points we need to be developed. Obviously, it's an issue, but it's not enough. We also need to take other criteria into account, which are the demography, the geographical situation, the kind of the needs for the consumers. Is it needs for normal power or high power? This is quite different. We need also to take into account the capacity of the networks to deliver this power, and in the end try to find the right balance between all these constraints and the needs. It's not really only an issue about how many charging points we need. It's, for example, if you compare the situation in Norway and France today, we have much more public charging point for one vehicle than in Norway. And however, the uptake of the electric vehicles are much more important in Norway than in France today. That also, because the situation is really different. In Norway, people have charging station at home because most of them live in houses. In France, a lot of people live in buildings, and they don't have often easy way to charge. Sometimes they don't have a parking, that's part of it. Sometimes they have a parking, but it's really a mess to get charging infrastructure installed in individual spot if you consider collective building. So there is some obstacle to overcome to make the development of charging infrastructures simpler in the city. I think demand-driven is an option, and we need also to work on collective building to make it much simpler. Today, it's too cost. It costs too much, and the delay for deploying the infrastructure is much longer.
Quickly, because otherwise we don't give enough time to Clara.
Yeah. I have a wish for the charging. It should be easy like a mobile phone. When I get out of the plane, anywhere in the world or in Europe, I just switch it on and it works. And for the charging, I would like to have the same. Just plug in and the vehicle will be charged.
Yeah, tomorrow charging should be as easily as fueling today, and even simpler because you could recharge at home, which you can't do right now, but with a fuel vehicle. But yes, obviously we need to make the charging operation much simpler. Yeah. So it's more reliable, more transparent information about the charging, and much easier access. So much more charging point in the end, but also much more qualitative charging point. That includes smart charging, but also smart location, and smart way to develop.
We shall move on and invite Clara to sit next to us. And in the meantime, we decided to be a bit innovative, so we will do Slido without Slido. But ask a question, and you just raise your hand if you agree with what we are saying, so that Clara can maybe integrate a bit this input from the room. Tag?
Yeah. So it's slightly hard to ask people to put their hands all the way up to 5 or only as low as 1. But I think we say this this is very important or not important. That the main research, innovation, technological areas to be tackled are vehicle electric motors and power electronics. Those who think that's very important to put their hands up.
Maybe we list them all, and then we go back to the question. Keep the micro next to you.
Vehicle electric motors and power electronics, battery pack integration, battery and vehicle management systems, infrastructure deployment needs, solutions for grid integration and managing of charging infrastructure, system integration with infrastructure and services, or innovative, interoperable and open access value added service.
Okay, we start again. First one.
Vehicle electric motors and power electronics.
You need to choose.
3.
Not many.
Battery pack integration, battery and vehicle management system.
More. 10-ish.
Infrastructure deployment needs.
20. It's more.
More than 20.
No, it's more than a...
Solutions for grid integration and management of charging infrastructure. System integration with infrastructure and services. And finally, innovative, interoperable, and open access value-added services. So the buzzwords.
This is a biased question.
Okay. So you're going to do the next?
No, I think we stop here, and maybe we give the first. Otherwise, Clara would really not have the time to conclude.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Okay, that's better like this. So thank you very much for inviting me here. Now I'm DG Klima, but I've been my heart and my brain still with digital research and innovation, where I've been working a long time, and in particular in transport. And today's session was as interesting as usual. Let me take a step back. Some years ago, we went to Paris, Union, nearly 200 countries in the world. We agreed that we have to do something to stop the increase in temperature in the world, 2 degrees and possibly 1.5 degrees, limiting that. That's one thing. Second, in Europe, we are the only part of the world, we have a framework for achieving these targets, which is legally binding and which has a structure, which has a systemic approach. Many of you were mentioning that we're talking about the cars emissions, we are talking about the greenhouse emissions from other sources, we are talking about renewables and efficiency, all of these things. So we have agreed, and hopefully all member states, we are not yet there, but nearly all have agreed that Europe needs to reach the net carbon economy by 2050. I think we all know that we will never get there if we don't have at least 2 things. Knowing that we have legislation in place and all this, that we have the technology deployed, that we have to develop technology that is not there, but for which we have the knowledge, and we have to solve the issues that we've been raising here. The batteries, and this session is not about the batteries, this is another session of batteries, but the batteries are at the heart of the problem. Infrastructures, you were saying very well, and we're talking with Erika, yes, there are issues of research and innovation, but there are many issues mainly about deployment, mainly about business cases, mainly. So this is a bunch of things which are absolutely necessary. First, to reach the objectives, and second, to help us in DG Klima to make a proper framework. The new commission has said, the new president said, I want a climate law, I want climate pact. We can't do that if we don't have solid knowledge and solid facts. We will not reach there, and second, we will not be credible. We are going to finish in a minute. But the other important thing that we need to have with us is the change in behaviors. And you were saying, Lorianne, a few minutes ago, that people are a bit tired of being told what to do. On the other hand, I always say repetition is the mother of pedagogy, so we need to understand what's going on and we need to remind ourselves what is needed. We are not saying to people what they should eat, how they should move, but we have to raise the awareness that if we don't change, each of us, our behavior, we will not get there. The good news is that in the last Eurobarometer, which was published a couple of weeks ago, it was saying, there were many questions as you can imagine, but one of them is, the replies were 93% of the Europeans were saying that climate change is a very important, a very serious matter in their private realm and in policy realm. And second, even more promising, I can say, is that 93% of citizens have decided already to change at least one thing in their lives or take at least one action to address climate change. So there is hope, but there is need for more investment, more political push. I think we have a lot from the Commission side, and I'm sure we'll be joined by the member states. And let us not forget, Europe aims at being the leader in reaching this carbon neutral economy, not by diminishing our well-being, but by innovating, gaining market, exporting our knowledge and our social values. And you have said, very all of you, leaving no one behind. So without research and technology, nothing will be possible. The partnership, and I stop there, that we have had already in 2 generations, the green car, then the green vehicle, has shown a great success. If only, for many other reasons, but if only for joining forces and putting all the heads and means together for a single end. I hope that we will manage to get an even more successful partnership for the future. And thank you for inviting us.
Thank you to all. And enjoy the discussion continue tomorrow. I think we are in the last session. I'm looking at the colleagues. Voilà. So enjoy the last days of the RNI days. And I wish a good success to every one of us. At the end of the day, it's a common agenda.
Great.